The Blast from Our Past Network.
Lock your doors, close your windows, turn out your lights, for chills and thrills await you. It's time for Podcasting After Dark with your hosts, Corey Stevenson and Zach Schaefer. Stay with a friend, say your prayers as grisly ghouls close in to seal your doom. Tonight's episode, Memory, The Origins of Alien, starring Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giger, and Ridley Scott.
Every film is a product of its time and tells you something about the time it was made. There's a special status that comes to some films that lodge in the audience's collective imagination. Alien is certainly one of those films.
Alien is a radical break with science fiction and that sanitized view of space.
Hans-Rudy Giger's images, they were sexual, mechanical, biological, and Ridley Scott was a gift from the gods.
Ridley wasn't certain how that was going to happen. All this innards of a cow and the blood.
That was Ridley wanting this to connect to the phobias that come from our ancient past.
They were all thinking about this as more than a science fiction adventure in the future.
There is a commentary in there about what we're doing as human beings.
Questions of where did life come from? What does it mean to be human?
One scratch from global disaster.
It's about those monsters outside the movie theater. It's haunting.
Alien was talking about something that we're still not comfortable addressing.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcasting After Dark. I'm one half of the pad team, Corey, a.k.a. Sleazy C. Joined with me, as always, my brother from another mother, Zach, the Total Snack and Schaefer. And this week, we have our second documentary film of August, which is our month of documentary films. And Zach's pick for the month, for the year, I guess, technically, was The Clones of Bruce. Enter the Clones of Bruce. And mine is Memory, The Origins of Alien. Zach, how's it going, buddy?
I was so confused when you first wanted to do this documentary because I turned it on and within the first 5 minutes, I'm like, why are these three old ladies sitting around with the chattering teeth that look like, weird dentist rejects? I don't get it. There's a connection to this. Oh, I'm doing good, by the way. I'm doing great. Thrilled to be alive.
I felt the same way when I was watching it. I was like, what the hell is this? But yeah, there's a point to it because they are sort of playing, not the Oracles of Delphi, the Furies. Yeah, they're playing the Furies. And there's a tie-in to that with the whole xenomorph mythology and everything like that. But we'll get into all of that.
Right.
Also, terrible name for a documentary, Memory. But also, just like the opening scene of this documentary, there's actually a point to that as well.
Yes, and yes. It's just not clearly defined. It's one of those things. There's a couple things with this documentary where you first start watching it and you go, oh, I don't know if this is going to be good. But then about 5-10 minutes into it, you go, oh, no, this is really good. They just didn't have like the best mind. They could have come up with a better title. And I would have taken that opening and put it towards the third act of the movie.
Right, where it's like closer tied into what they're actually talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where they're literally talking about it at that moment. Because up until that point, they don't really mention the purpose of that opening scene, which is totally fine. It just makes it a little wonky. That's all that to say, this is a great documentary. It just, needs a little fine tuning.
Yeah, no, and I think this is one of those documentaries, I believe, was crowdfunded, like one of those Kickstarter deals or, I believe so. I never watched it when it came out back in 2019 because, I'm not the biggest making of documentary guy. Even though I have a film background, I still I care more about what I see on the screen and the story, you know, that's actually the story of the film itself, less so much what goes into making the movie. I mean, I liked the documentary on the quadrilogy about the making of Aliens and stuff. But the funny thing is, this is not really a technical documentary. This is more of a documentary on the cultural mythology that went into making this movie and the ideas behind it. And if I had known that, I think I would have been much more like excited to see it when it first came out.
Yeah, agreed. I recently just watched the Life After Flash documentary, which I had assumed would be mostly about Flash Gordon and a little bit about Sam Jones. And it's more about Sam Jones and more and with some cool insight about Flash Gordon, the making of. And I like documentaries like that. I like that where it's not a straight up just, you know, rehash and behind the scenes completely of the movie. And those should be reserved for the extras on a Blu-ray, a la The Thing, you know, which has like a 70-minute documentary on the making of The Thing, which is great. This made me want to revisit Prometheus again, this one.
Yeah. Yeah, right?
Yeah, and when I started describing the backstory and the mythology behind what Alien is truly about to Bodhi, he got excited and he said, "When do you think I can watch that?" I said, "I think you could probably watch it now." He's like, "Okay." I said, "Do you want to watch it now?" He goes, "Yeah, I think so." So we will be watching it soon. And then he'll either join me for Wrap Up After Dark at the end of the month, or I'll give his review at the end of the month if he can't join me. If you're not a Patreon member and you're wondering what the heck are we talking about, go to patreon.com/podcastingafterdark and you can sign up to become a member of our Patreon community, help support the show, help keep the sleazy lights on in our video store, and you can listen to Wrap Up After Dark. It's our monthly wrap-up series where we talk about what we did this month, blah, 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 blah. Lots to cover in the month of August, I can tell you that much.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, we will talk about whether or not my son, Bodhi, watched Alien. And by the way, if you don't know who Bodhi is, go to the latest episode of 80s Kids Unite on our respective YouTube channels and subscribe to it, by the way. And check out Bodhi talking about 80s summer memories with the Date for a Night Boy crew. Cheap plug.
Very
done.
Good, buddy. Good job, buddy. Good job. Isolate all that and turn that into an ad. Yeah, dude. I was gonna say, you know, like you mentioned, on the Thing Blu-ray, there's like a, you know, documentary on the making of, and that's all well and good. I you know, sometimes I like to see how the molds are made for all these creatures and stuff.
Yeah.
But I would be more infinitely interested in the mythology, talking about like the mythology of the Thing, you know, versus the actual technical aspect of it. And that's what this documentary does. And really it gets into the mind of Dan O'Bannon. And my God, dude, like, I know he only directed like 3 movies. He did, obviously, Return of the Living Dead, movie we covered so early on back in the day, a movie that you and I both absolutely adore. We love it to death. He also did The Resurrected, which I need to see. You've been telling me about that one forever. But the fact that, like, he's written so many movies that are near and dear to my heart is just, it blows my mind that, like, I mean, I think I've always known these things, but like, it's really been within the last year or so that I guess I should say I've started paying attention to like what Dan O'Bannon has been sort of like, what he contributed. And what sort of like made me sort of realize this was when you and I, it's not out yet, but you and I revisited Heavy Metal, the movie, with our friend Luna, and I never realized that Dan O'Bannon wrote a couple of those stories, specifically the you know, B-52 one, the zombies on the plane and everything, but he also like worked on Blue Thunder, he worked on Life Force, Invaders from Mars, Total Recall, you know, obviously Alien 3 is kind of based on characters by him and all that kind of stuff. But he also wrote Screamers, which I'm sure we called out at the time. But like, I'm just now sort of taking this view of Dan O'Bannon's body of work and realizing just how influential he was on the stuff that I loved growing up. And this documentary, one of the key aspects of this documentary is diving into Dan O'Bannon, the man, the myth, the legend. They talk to his wife and everything, and people that knew him and stuff. And man, I'm so intrigued by Dan O'Bannon.
Me too, and I'm disappointed by IMDb, because if you go to IMDb, they don't list his directing credits. They only list his writing and acting
You have to
credits.
select it on the filter. For some reason, it's automatically deselected on the filter. You have to actually go to It's a new feature that IMDb has that fucking sucks.
It's lame. So one, I highly recommend you check out The Resurrected. It is definitely one of my favorite H.P. Lovecraft. It's definitely one of my favorite H.P. Lovecraft adaptations, and obviously next to
all the other loose adaptations like The Thing and Alien. I mean, there's strong H.P. Lovecraft connections here.
Yeah, and of course Stuart Gordon's H.P. Lovecraft films probably are at the top. I would put Resurrected really close up there as well. And yeah, he is so interesting. I remember a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I interviewed one of the stars of Return of the Living Dead, Beverly Randolph, who played Tina.
Yeah.
For another project I was working on years ago. And she told a very interesting story about Dan O'Bannon.
With his gun on the table and everything, and porn magazines everywhere.
Yeah, and after watching this documentary, I'm like, well, this guy sounds like he was in constant pain. That kind of tracks that he would be a little out there. That would add to his out there-ness. But man, yeah, so many prolific projects he's worked on as a writer. And, it's so cool in this documentary how they talk about Jodorowsky, his connection to Jodorowsky. And we, of course, covered the Jodorowsky documentary last year in the Making of Dune, another making of doc, loosely. And I think it's cool that Jodorowsky's connection to Dan O'Bannon is so strong. I totally foresee him as being this doc covered things that I had no idea about Dan O'Bannon to the point where I'm like, one, it doesn't surprise me that John Carpenter is a jerk, and two, that Dan O'Bannon is so much more than what I knew him from. He's so creative, his mind is so amazing, and his wife, who he clearly has a deep connection with, seems really cool too, and she seems very in tune with what future projects could come out of Dan O'Bannon from the grave.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's apparently he was writing his own version of the Necronomicon and everything. But real quick, guys, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview on this doc. It's funny because as much as we don't love the title of it, and the opening is a little bit disjointed until you actually watching it a second time, it works better because I understand why that opening is there.
Yeah.
But once the doc gets going, after that first 4-minute opening scene, it's very focused, and it almost is broken down in chunks. They're they go from one topic to another. It's not like there's any title cards, but the chunks kind of go like an examination of Dan O'Bannon, then it kind of goes into H.R. Giger, and then it goes into Ridley Scott, and then it kind of goes into the movie, but sort of focuses most of the last 20 minutes is mostly focused on the chest burster scene and sort of how important it was and everything like that. So that's kind of how we're going to keep the conversation going. So sticking with Dan O'Bannon for a little bit, they talk about some of his personal origins and everything. And the fact that he grew up on that, a farm out in the middle of nowhere that had no TV, no telephones, no libraries in town. And his wife talks about the fact that he just inherently understood things about mythology and everything. He's almost was like a man out of time, from a different time. He and again, like you said, Zach, he was just the guy that directed, Return of the Living Dead. You know what I mean? And I know he worked on the script of this. I never realized how much of Alien is from Dan O'Bannon and his Crohn's disease.
Me too. And the fact that he lived so rural, because there's a few things that come out of that kind of living, and serial killers are one of them. So
right, look at our review of Deranged.
Oh my God. Yeah, and he got a hold of certain comic books from back in the day that clearly inspired him as well. And was he talking to John Carpenter about this stuff when he was making Dark Star? Well, yeah, he was, because they talk about how Dark Star was an influence on Alien. Like, it was what he wanted to do, with a bigger budget.
Yeah.
And a different tone. Yeah, I was blown away by all the different backstories about his career. And I also loved how there's a really great collection of interviews on this of people that clearly know what they're talking about, and along with people who were friends with Dan O'Bannon and obviously his wife. And there's archival footage of Dan O'Bannon talking, which is cool. But they talked about certain comic books that influenced his script for Alien, one of them being Seeds of Jupiter, I think.
Yeah, Seeds of Jupiter, yeah, from EC Comics.
Yeah, I want to get that. And then Death Rattle was another one they kind of touch on. And
yeah,
I want to. And there's certain movies that were influenced by Alien as well, and I want to get some of those too.
Yeah, no, I wrote those down, Zach. It, The Terror from Beyond Space from 1958, The Thing from Another World, obviously from 1951, Planet of the Vampires, 1965, and Queen of Blood from 1966. How about that young John Saxton in Queen of Blood?
And young Dennis Hopper, too.
Was that Dennis Hopper? I forgot to look it up. I watched this doc twice, and both times it's a real quick flash, and I was like, oh my God, is that Dennis Hopper? I blown away. For me, the 60s, like, we both love like 70s horror and stuff like that. And I think we both like certain things about 50s stuff. For me, the 60s is kind of this blank area that I don't know much about. I have Barbarella, on Blu-ray, and the Arrow one. I need to watch that. I've seen it before, but I need to rewatch it. But dude, I was shocked at how beautiful the colors were in Planet of the Vampires.
Yeah. And Roger Corman, I believe, directed that. So that's why, and he uses and reuses the same cast over and over again, because he basically was like the Hammer horror director over here,
Yeah.
And so he knew how to tell a good story on a cheap budget. And actually, at one point, talks about how he had said to Dan O'Bannon that he could make Alien if he wanted to, but he felt like it deserved a bigger budget. Essentially, he said that. And yeah, that movie looks great. I think it's available on Blu-ray, right?
I think Kino put it out. I'm kind of hoping there'll be a 4K or something, because the colors look amazing.
Yeah, I've never seen it in all of the source material other than The Thing. Original version of The Thing. I've seen that.
Me too.
I haven't seen all the other ones, and they sound fantastic. So it's cool that they covered all that stuff in the documentary, not too extensively, where you feel like they're just like, they're not doing what we do, guys. But
yeah, they're not breaking it down and everything.
No.
But yeah, they're definitely mentioning it.
But it's so cool. And then obviously they showed the connections between In the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, which was of huge source material for other films as well.
So, dude, I wanted to bring that up. You did mention like some 50s movies and EC Comics and everything, but Lovecraft was a big, big influence on Dan O'Bannon, and particularly at The Mountains of Madness, which I just read for the first time about 6 months ago. And I've been, I've been wanting to read it for so long. And I actually picked up an H.P. Lovecraft book that didn't have that in it. I forgot, I read something else in that one, but it didn't have it in it, and I stumbled upon one that did, picked it up, read it. It holds up. It's
okay.
Like it's worth. I'm not gonna say it's worth the wait, but like it's everything that society has told me it was. I was pretty riveted when I was reading it, and I can obviously see all the people that were influenced by it, and Alien definitely being one of it, this like cosmic horror, you know, going to this like dead planet and everything like that. It was pretty amazing. So if you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It's not terribly long, maybe 150, 200 pages, something like that. You know, it's not terribly long.
Is that pictures?
No, it doesn't. But I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if somebody adapted it into a comic book at some point.
I don't need a book without pictures. That's fine. I mean, I don't need pictures in a book. Sort of, maybe. Yes.
Sort of. I know. I do usually.
I love pictures. I like looking at things.
But Zach, let's transition into H.R. Giger. Like we knew this, we talked about it on the Jodorowsky doc that we reviewed last year. But just to let you guys know, basically, Jodorowsky hired Dan O'Bannon to work on that Dune movie that never got made, and he, met H.R. Giger through that. And then when Dan O'Bannon and Jodorowsky, the movie imploded, Dan O'Bannon, contacted Giger to basically, design some stuff. And Giger didn't click with the studio. But then when Ridley Scott came on, and by the way, I didn't know that Walter Hill was originally supposed to direct Alien. I knew he had like some story stuff that he did with the movie, but I didn't know he was the original director.
Yeah, so it sounds like he kind of came in to polish up Dan O'Bannon's story, which was a little too like comedic, I guess, at times. And sounds like he made it a little more serious in tone. But one of the guys that's on this as one of the talking heads is a guy named Ben Mankiewicz, who is, I know him from being the new kind of voice of Turner Classic Movies. He was a guy who took over for, I forget the guy whose name originally he took over for. That guy passed away a few years ago. It was so cool. He would always introduce the movie on Turner Classic Movies before they showed it. What a great station, by the way. And in fact, we interviewed two people connected to Turner Classic Movies a year ago, two female writers that I think we're still friends with. I'm friends with them on Instagram. Very cool. I forget the name of the book, but it was a book about cult movies. Good read. Go back into our archives and you guys can all find that book because they cover movies that obviously we cover on our show. Anyways, beside the point. Ben Mankiewicz is he's kind of like the voice now of Turner Classic Movies. He knows what he's talking about. He's like us. He loves film. So and all levels of genre, and he's the one who mentions that Walter Hill was originally tapped to direct, but then he decided to go make Southern Comfort. And it's funny because he kind of like pauses for a minute and he goes, "It's a good movie also," and I agree. It's one of my it's maybe in my top 5 of Walter Hill movies, but it's at the bottom of my top 5. It's very good, but it's no Alien. And he even says that. He goes, but it's no Alien.
No, it did not have the cultural impact that Alien had.
No, because it is derivative of movies like Deliverance, and Alien really has, outside of maybe comparisons to 2001 just being out in space, there's no comparison to Alien.
No. And then Alien in 2001 have the same, I think production designers or whatever. And they even talk about the scene in Alien where, Brett gets killed. He's in that hangar, that landing bay, where it looks like it's the feet, for the ship or something like that. And he's like, and there's rain in there. And they're like, how is that possible? And Ridley Scott's like, I don't know. I don't care. I love it. And they talk about the fact that we don't question that when we see the movie. It just works so incredibly well, especially with when the camera's moving through the Nostromo, and how there's that one book where the pages are open, they're kind of fluttering, and they're like, where's the air coming from? It doesn't matter. It's so fucking cool. But I think what works, one of the things that really is the core of this documentary and the core of Alien itself is this trifecta of Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giger, and Ridley Scott. They were all on the same page when it comes to it's not the zeitgeist, but like the mythology of like humanity, you know, like this stuff that they're dealing with. Like we mentioned the Greek Furies and stuff like that. And the alien is a representation of the Furies and stuff. And just all these like, just these deep, dark, like DNA, it's in our DNA as a species, some of these fears and everything. And all three of these guys were on the exact same page together. I think Walter Hill would have been out of place here, you know. I don't think he was the right choice for this movie. But like again, this documentary is not about, you know, oh, how did we position the camera and this and that. They talk a little bit about that, but it's more about the cultural mythology, our shared mythology, you know, and how Giger has this love for ancient Egypt. And in the original script, you know, it wasn't supposed to be a derelict spaceship. It was supposed to be pyramids. And there was all this iconography. And then like how there's all these crescent moons in the movie. And I think in you know, Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology, that represents death, is the crescent moon. I mean, guys, I watched this documentary twice and I don't feel like I still got everything. Like there was so much stuff that I'm like, I am too dumb to understand this, you know?
Well, I know, I agree. I feel like this definitely bears repeated viewing. And I think that Walter Hill's always been associated with this, and people go, oh, cool, it's a Walter Hill movie. He's as much a part of this as someone who gets an executive producing credit. You know, they just get their name on it, basically. He had a hand in it, but it wasn't a huge hand. It's really the three people, Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giger, and like nobody, stop calling him Geiger, because at one point, even in this docs, one of the people interviewed says Geiger, and I'm like, oh my God, like we got to fix this in our society. Correct people if they mispronounce something. It's okay. You're not going to offend them. You're actually going to educate them. And there's nothing wrong with being educated or woke. Anyways.
And you won't offend Giger because he's passed away anyway.
I did, as I am already passed. I already had.
It's funny that you mentioned that because he does call Dan O'Bannon. I think that's his accent though.
Yeah. We all have mispronunciations in life. It happens. But, where was I going with this? No, so...
Oh, the trifecta. Ridley Scott,
yeah, it's really...
Giger, you screwed me, Giger.
Sorry.
And Dan O'Bannon.
It's John Delafonte, Freddie Furstenberg, and Scotty Tuhati.
Brangus.
Yeah, Brangus. No, it's really the three guys. Those are the ones that made this what it is. And I love that while there are commentators that give a take on the political commentary that the movie's making, especially about, you know,
imperialism,
female empowerment, or, you know,
male rape.
Yeah. So those are really interesting points for sure. But I agree with you. I think where I derive the most pleasure is from the mythology. And, you know, one quick example, you know, Athena was basically, she rose from Zeus's head. She came out of his head, which is very reminiscent of the chest burster. There is an artist that they talk about, Francis Bacon, and
yes,
and his huge influence on the chest burster as well. And I was describing this to Bodie, and I think he found it really like weird and cool at the same time, because I said this guy was fascinated with mouths, probably from the fact that he was, well, they talk about how he had a, you know, very strict father who was probably abusive in some way, and Francis Bacon was gay, so, you know, there's some connection there, I'm sure. But he drew these very abstract, like, images of creatures with these human mouths attached to them, like very abstract, just images in general, with this with a very humanistic, normal, like humanistic, creepy mouth attached to it. And that's what later became the xenomorph baby. So that's fascinating. I didn't know that. And they actually have interview footage of Francis Bacon, I believe. And, you know, very brief. And there's a scholar that they interview, and he's the author of the Francis Bacon biography. And he goes, well, it was very wide known that he was a homosexual. And I just like the way he said that. It was very funny. And yeah, it's very cool that they got into all that stuff because we have to, it's like, what's the hook about this thing? What's the thing that's going to separate this from just a regular standard documentary? And again, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning of this episode. It made me want to watch Prometheus more because I'm like, oh, this is really deep rooted with Ridley Scott. And yeah, I think outside of Blade Runner, this is probably his best movie he's ever done and his peak artistry when he was truly tapping in to his artistic side versus his just commercial filmmaking side. I mean, they talk about how he's got a vision. Basically, it's like he's got a camera strapped to his head at all times. He always sees everything in a wide lens, which is very cool. And there's great kind of archival footage of showing him directing the movie.
And real quick, I'm sorry, the wide lens thing, the anamorphic lens that they use, I loved how they again, this movie's not talking about how we set up the lighting and all that kind of stuff. It's more about what we're seeing in the frame, and his anamorphic lens that he chose allows him to have all the cast members in one shot. And the dinner scene, everyone's talking at the same level, and it's up to us to decide who we want to listen to and stuff like that. I found all that so fascinating, and then talking about how, disconnected Ash is from everybody else and everything. I thought that was really cool. That's the extent of how technical they talk. It's still, everything is also about how, having all those people talking at the same time. They compared it to 1970s, the movie MASH, and how that was filmed and everything, and how it's sort of contemporary and everything. There's just so much stuff happening here. And then on top of it, we briefly mentioned the imperialism and everything, and how at the same time, that this was being made, so was, Apocalypse Now. Francis Ford Coppola was, adapting Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And then in Alien, the Nostromo and the Narcissus, they're both named that because they're words that were used in Joseph Conrad books about the evils of imperialism, and specifically when conquest of unexplored regions, and especially if you're trying to exploit said regions. There's so much here, man. There's so much here. I feel like I'm sure somebody does this. I mean, in college, I'm sure there can be in film school, there's probably a professor that probably just focuses on Alien for an entire semester and all these things that it means and everything.
Yeah, because you could branch out and go really deep on every single one of the topics they hit on in this. One in particular, the inspiration for the aliens, birthing themselves inside of creatures, while there is they touch upon, like Corey said, male rape, which is very interesting. That's a whole other topic that they hit on that's fascinating to me. But the cicada, or the the caterpillar,
and the wasp, the parasitic wasp.
Yeah, the parasitic wasp that lays its eggs inside of caterpillars, and they show at one point the wasp larva coming out of the caterpillar. It's disgusting, and it is literally the chest burst scene. That was the creation for the chest burster, which is fascinating to me. I meant to say this too at the onset. I saw this movie, the last time I watched Alien was at the ArcLight Theater in Hollywood, which sadly is no longer here. It closed during the pandemic. And but when I did see it there, Veronica Cartwright did an introduction to the movie. And when she was finished doing the intro, she talked about how she's going to sit down with everybody, watch it as well. She sat down right behind me, which was amazing. And so I heard her kind of whispering throughout, or giggling and gasping at certain scenes. And she did mention during her introduction about how in that chest burst scene, which we'll get to obviously at the end, how she fell over and that was not intentional, but got back up, and how it was really funny. So watching it then and watching it again now when they show the scene in the movie, in the documentary, it makes me laugh because it's obviously a mistake, but they play it so well. It looks realistic. It looks authentic.
Right, and they kind of dispel that urban legend that the actors didn't know that he was, it was going to burst out of his chest. And even as a kid, when I heard that, I was like, that can't be right, because I know what it takes for them to set that shot up and everything. And the actors saw that it was like a prosthetic, body and everything. There was no surprise. They knew something was coming, but it was the fact that they sort of botched it kind of twice. The chest burster didn't break through the shirt like the second time, type of thing. So I think what kind of got, like morphed and changed over time is, yes, their reactions are genuine, but it happened because the first 2 times they were like, oh, it's no big deal. And then when it finally worked the 3rd time, I do think that's what they were like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting, because it just it was so unassuming the first 2 times, the first 2 takes, and then boom, that happened. So it's kind of nice to actually have that sort of urban legend dismissed, because that's, for some reason, that's very prevalent. People are like, oh, do you know that the actors didn't know that, something was going to burst through his chest at that point? That's why all their reactions are so good. Well, no. They're good actors. First off, you're taking away the fact that they're really, all the people in this fucking movie are amazing fucking actors at almost at the peak of their acting ability. So don't take that away from them. So I'm glad that we kind of get the full story on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there were other components that also made them like shocked and grossed out, that being the smell when they walked in.
Yeah.
And they also talk about how Ripley was originally scripted to be a man, and, things that we've already heard before. Side note, I watched this on Amazon Prime, and there was a commercial midway through, 2 commercials, sadly, because that's what Amazon does now, because they could do whatever the hell they want. It was for Crohn's disease, which I thought was hilarious.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, we kind of touched on that, but yeah, Dan O'Bannon had Crohn's, and I guess that's kind of what, he succumbed to when he finally passed, which I didn't know you could die from Crohn's.
Me too.
That's pretty scary. So, there's a lot of that, was in Alien too, obviously a creature coming out of his stomach and everything.
Yeah. I mean, that explains a lot, right?
Right. Exactly. And to kind of explain the title of the movie, Memory, Dan O'Bannon wrote a 29-page, is a script, sort of. It was kind of the beginnings of something. And it was called Memory. And it was the guy who, I guess a producer, friend or whatever, I forgot the guy's name. He said that it's pretty much the first act of Alien, almost exactly. So that's why this documentary is called Memory. It's because of that first draft of that script. But this, Zach and I are kind of like, there's so many things to talk about here, but this documentary does do a great job of flowing from one topic to the next. Like I said earlier, the weirdness of the opening scene that they clearly filmed and everything aside, this is a very well-made and focused and flowing documentary. The pacing of this documentary, I think, is fantastic. Hey everybody, Corey here. I just want to let you know that we'll be right back after these short messages.
Have you been wondering where's the beef? Well, on our podcast, Throwback Trivia Takedown, you might just find that out, as well as some other things about the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
We're a nostalgic-based trivia show that pits 2 challengers head-to-head in a duel of the decades, with categories ranging from movies, TV, and music, to slang, food, and fashion. You're sure to get the best in retro-themed trivia.
So strap on your jelly shoes, grab a Surge, and walk like an Egyptian to your favorite podcast app and check out Throwback Trivia Takedown.
I heard even Mikey likes it.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim.
And I'm Dean.
And we're the hosts of Talking Back. We're a retro-based podcast covering movies, comics, video games, and more.
Check us out every Monday where we hit the rewind button and dig into some of our favorite content from the past. We like to keep things fun, lighthearted, and informative.
Do you feel like you need more nostalgia in your life? Then check out Talking Back. We're available everywhere podcasts are found.
And now, back to the show.
It is fantastic. You mentioned the guy that was friends with Dan O'Bannon, and I'm blanking on his name because I didn't write it down. Shoot. One of the guys who knew Dan O'Bannon well, and actually directed one of Dan O'Bannon's movies that he wrote, Dead and Buried, Gary Sherman. And Gary Sherman is interviewed in this as well, which I thought was cool. Because, by the way, Dead and Buried is I wouldn't say it's like a classic, but it's a really good thriller to see. And it's got a classic scene with like a nurse with a giant needle about to stick it in a guy's eye.
Oh, the guy that's all bandaged up in one of those full body. Yeah,
I think it's Lisa Blount from Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. But they interview him. I think he's one of the guys that also like reiterates that Dan O'Bannon's, the script for Memory was so good. And again, I'll bring it up again, like we both did. He's the heart really of Alien. Alien would not exist if it wasn't for him.
Yeah. And I never kind of realized that. Growing up, Alien was always a Ridley Scott film. And,
I'll cut you off really quick. The guy it was Ronald Shusett. And he was the writer of Total Recall, which I did not know. Because I'm like, this guy looks like he's, known for stuff. He passed away, sadly.
Last year.
Yeah, last year. But he was a prolific writer as well. Had a lot of... He gets a credit for a lot of the Alien projects because he gets a created by credit or based on characters created by credit or elements created by credit for a lot of the Alien franchise. And he wrote Above the Law, which I love. It's probably my favorite Steven Seagal movie, ? I think it is. The King Kong Lives movie with Linda Hamilton.
Yeah, I like that one. You know how much I love her.
I know you do. And he wrote the screenplay because of Dan O'Bannon, I think, wrote the story for Dead and Buried, Final Terror, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, he gets a story credit for Alien as well.
I was looking him up and I was waiting to insert that in. But yeah, Ronald Shusett, and he passed away last year, unfortunately.
But he is a character. He's the one that mentions that Dan O'Bannon wrote the Memory.
Yeah, the Memory. There's a lot of information in this documentary, and the reason I pulled the trigger on this one, honestly, it was pretty much almost like the last minute. I was still trying to decide what my documentary was going to be, and it was just when I started piecing together how much Dan O'Bannon was influential on the things that I loved growing up. And then I kind of just stumbled upon somebody mentioning that this documentary is very Dan O'Bannon centric. And then coupled with the fact that we covered Aliens last month, thanks to Brian and everything, I was like, you know what? Let me check this out. And, I'm so happy that I did, because it does what a great documentary is supposed to do, I think. Especially when you're talking about subjects like this that just have so many branches you can go down. But it got me excited to go down different branches, to learn more about Dan O'Bannon, to learn more about Greek mythology, to learn more about H.R. Giger's, Necronomicon and that book. I've had it since like the early 90s, but I have that hardcover Alien book that's all the illustrations by H.R. Giger and everything. And they even mentioned the fact that like Dan O'Bannon paid Giger out of his own pocket, because the studio Brandywine wouldn't pay for the paintings that he was going to do for them and everything. Right. And that's why when you actually see some of the earlier artwork by H.R. Giger, it says Dan O'Bannon's Alien, because Dan O'Bannon's the one that paid for him. Like, he paid out of pocket for him. There were so many, man, I'm just so happy that Walter Hill moved out of the way. And I love Walter Hill. I just do not think he was the right attachment for this project, because again, I think it needed the trifecta that we mentioned, because I think all three of those guys, knew exactly, what they were going for. Oh, I know what I was going to say earlier, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much.
It's okay.
I love Blade Runner. I love Alien. I love Ridley Scott. I love how beautiful Prometheus is. I don't love it technically as an alien film. And, you know, even with like Romulus and everything, you know, I'm always like, why does like Ridley Scott get so much say in what happens in the alien universe? It's like he owns it, but I'm like, it's not. It's more Dan O'Bannon than it is Ridley Scott. I get it. Like the final product is Ridley Scott, but it's so much Dan O'Bannon. So my question to you, Zach, is if Dan O'Bannon was still alive, do you think Ridley Scott would still be taking so much ownership of the Alien franchise and specifically like guiding it even to today?
Well, I think you'd probably have more of a controversy like you would like with Night of the Living Dead, you know, where there's two different perspectives, George Romero and then
and Russo, right?
Yeah, Russo were like, well, it's my project. No, it's my story. It's my script.
Which is very reminiscent of Dark Star.
Yes. Dan O'Bannon came up with the concept, but I think where it takes off, at least it's implied in the documentary, is Ridley Scott had this vision, this deeper vision with the mythology. That seems to be his kind of vision. At least it's portrayed this way in the documentary. He came up with that backstory to it, which I think is very cool. It's not to dismiss Dan O'Bannon at all, but I feel like Dan O'Bannon is very much a pulp kind of guy, like just gets straight to the goods, you know, and don't worry about what happened before. Like the one story that he's influenced by, the one EC comic where the creature is on the ship and the creature gets on the ship and it starts attacking people in the sea, and then they kick it off into the water and they're like, oh, that's the end of that. But is it the end of that? No, it's not, which I think is a great story, but I feel like that's Dan O'Bannon. Dan O'Bannon's like the guy where he goes, let's just get right to it, you know. And Ridley Scott, I feel, is just like, well, there's this backstory of like, you know, where the gunner, you know, and where did he come from, and this ancient mythology of these creatures, and you know, the ship is actually like the ship is the crescent of the, like that's an element of Giger and Scott together, I feel like.
Yeah,
to me.
Yeah. And no, and that's a good point, because the Seeds of Jupiter, that EC comic that you're mentioning,
Seeds of Jupiter.
It was only like also like a 15 issue thing. Hey everybody, Corey here with my editor's cap on. I realized that I just said 15 issues. What I meant to say was 15 pages. That dramatically changes the point I was trying to make about Dan O'Bannon. So Seeds of Jupiter was 15 pages, not 15 issues. And then you also think back like, okay, Dan O'Bannon's memory was like 29 pages, and then like, you know, like you're like, oh, he's known for Dead and Buried, but it's kind of like it's just his story. Someone else had to write the script, and maybe you're right. Maybe Dan O'Bannon is the idea guy. He's got the idea. He pitches you the idea, but he needs somebody to flesh it out,
which is fine. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that, you know, and Ridley Scott is the visionary who makes it all work. It is funny that they comment in the documentary about the chestburster scene and how it's shot in daylight and almost you know, brightly lit, and you can see everything. And then Ridley Scott goes, and they, you know, versus doing the cheesy, like they didn't say cheesy, but they're like versus doing the cliche thing, or essentially they say cliche thing of darkly lit with the steam coming off it, and then
in
they
Covenant, in Alien Covenant,
they cut to Prometheus.
That's Covenant.
That's Covenant. Okay,
that's the second one, and yeah, so basically Ridley Scott revisits the chestburster scene in Covenant. They do mention Prometheus and everything and whatnot, but he revisits it in Covenant. And yeah, you're right. They're talking about how it's more cliche in Covenant, where it's darkly lit and all this kind of stuff. But it's, and then they also kind of, wax poetic about how, it's Ridley Scott always revisiting this idea and everything. And, but yeah, it's they come back to it. But in Alien, it's broad daylight, essentially.
Well, I think this is not disparaging on Ridley Scott, but I did say this when I was with Diallo one time. We were driving to the movies, and one of his French movie just came out with Joaquin Phoenix. He plays Napoleon, the Napoleon movie he made.
Yeah.
And Diallo was saying, yeah, it's pretty good. I forget exactly what he said, but he essentially said it was good. And I said, I don't like here's the thing about Ridley Scott. Like, I just like, it doesn't, Gladiator, like, yeah, cool. Gladiator's cool and all, but I just don't like the way these movies are shot. They're too clean. They're too polished looking. So you look back at Alien in that chestburster scene where it's so just gritty and, 1979, like, right? Cusp of 80s. And then you go to watch the stuff now and it all looks the same. They all use the same frame rate. They all use the same kind of color matte with their visuals, and it all looks the same. It didn't look the same back then to me. I'm just speaking personally. So I don't like a Ridley Scott movie now. I don't go, whoa, look at that.
Yeah, I don't even care. Like, I didn't see Gladiator 2. I didn't see that Napoleon one. And, I watched Gladiator when it first came out, but I wasn't in love with it like some people were. I think you're right. I think this, Blade Runner and Alien are, the peak area of his creativity, And maybe that's just because you're young and hungry at that point. But I think that's the most interesting stuff that he's done, are those type of movies.
I think so. And I think that's why I'm glad he didn't do the Blade Runner sequel, because I think the Blade Runner sequel is really good, and it's directed by a different director. I think the guy that did Dune, right?
Denis Villeneuve, however you pronounce his name. Yeah.
So I think it speaks again to what we've talked about on our Auteur de Force shows on Patreon, patreon.com/podcasting after dark, where we talk about different auteurs like John Carpenter, Don Coscarelli, and now Bill Lustig. They are so visionary in what they make on screen, but then these guys could only go so far, which is fine. I think Spielberg's the same way. I think Spielberg has his best days are behind him, which is not a knock. It's just, I think that is what it is.
Well, musicians kind of, the same thing sort of happens. It's I don't even know if Korn is still producing albums or new stuff, but it's can you still be angry in your 50s? You know what I mean? How does that even work? Maybe just some things are just of that era of your life, and of the time. And maybe you could say that, okay, Ridley Scott evolved over time into something different, but I think what he sort of has evolved into is a director that I just don't find all that interesting anymore.
I agree. I also, it sounds like he's more of a dick now than he used to be back in the day too, but that comes with him just having control over his movies. And I agree with you, bands, when they come out and they're like, you guys all want to hear our hits, but we want to play the new stuff. And you're like, no, we don't want to hear the new stuff. We want to just keep playing the hits. Yeah. Just keep showing The Thing by John Carpenter.
Yeah.
I also want to point out too, because there was some reviewer, quote unquote, on IMDb who was knocking the perspectives that some of the talking point people have in this documentary. And overanalyzing and that's not what this movie is. It's just a fucking sci-fi alien movie. And you're like, bruh, look, I get it. We all have perspectives. We all have assholes too. And apparently this guy kind of seems like one, but it's not a tease, but I'm just going to straight up say, we have an upcoming director on our show who made movies that got overanalyzed to death, where people were like, oh, this was such a huge statement on, women's lib or the drug culture of the night. No, he's just making a movie. And he even says that too when we interview him. So I'm not going to reveal who that is until later, but it's true. Not everything has this deep meaning, but Alien does have a deeper meaning on the mythology tip.
Yeah, no, and by the way, the director that we're talking about is going to be a part of our crossover event next month, the $2 late fee Podcast After Dark crossover event all month long, and so you'll hear that interview next month, so you don't have to wait too long. But yeah, so but that's okay. It's okay for some directors, like the one we're talking about, to be like, nope, this just means exactly what it looks like on the screen, and that's it. And it's also okay for other directors like Ridley Scott to, totally put all these ideas and draw from these ideas. And yes, they do mean this. And yes, even if it's subconscious, some things might actually be subconscious. But let's be honest, Alien is a far superior film to the ones we're going to be covering next month. Doesn't mean that I don't love the ones we're covering next month on the crossover month. Doesn't mean I don't think they're great movies as well, but I don't really see those movies getting analyzed in film school. Alien is just, it's all the same medium. It's all the medium of film, just like there's all kinds of different books. They're all the medium of literature, but some can have more meaning and more impact than others.
Alien is groundbreaking. Alien is groundbreaking, franchise making, pop culture defining. Yeah. And there will never be anything quite like it again. You can't compare it. It's the original and the sequel are uncomparable because they're two completely different movies, of which we covered Aliens obviously last month. And in doing so, I'm realizing, and I already realized it, but in doing so, I realized that, they live separate lives. They can, versus having to have this, original for the sequel. Like Aliens can live on its own. Alien can live on its own. And then it should stop right there, in my opinion.
Or you go forward with the Dark Horse comics, which I love.
Yeah, just do that. But it's really beautiful to see like the depth that they cover in this documentary, because like we said before, a lot of territory that I didn't know about is covered.
Same.
And what they do with actors like Tom Skerritt and Veronica Cartwright, who were interviewed in this, which is very cool. Their insight is, it's fun. Like, it's fun to hear their own kind of takes on stuff. And you're right. You said this earlier in the discussion. This cast is phenomenal, and it is chocked full of people that you wouldn't see outside of maybe Yaphet Kotto in like a schlocky B movie. Yaphet Kotto did, exploitation films, but Harry Dean Stanton and, Veronica Cartwright, Tom Skerritt, and Ian Holm and John Hurt, they're not, and of course Sigourney Weaver, but I think this was one of her first movies.
Yeah.
So she's maybe the odd person out. Sorry. Like their resumes speak for themselves, and it's an intelligent film. Like, it takes a lot of thought, and it's so crazy, like, to watch this documentary and go, man, I cannot wait to rewatch Alien again. Cause that's how I felt when I was done with it.
Yes, me too, buddy. Me too. I think I'm so excited. I'll probably pop it on tonight when we're done recording before I go to bed. It's such an amazing movie. I do love it. I've always loved Aliens more, but it doesn't mean I don't love Alien as well.
Right.
And I think watching Alien after watching Memory I think it'll add, more to the experience and everything. So I'm very excited about that. I think this documentary is top notch. It's definitely more up my alley. And it seems like yours as well, than just like straight technical, like how did we, first we cast, John Hurt's body, and then we, cut a cellophane hole through, I don't care about that. I understand, and I'm sure some people do, and that's A-okay, no problem there. There's other documentaries out there like that. I want to know, what this inspiration was like, and this documentary dives into all of that. And that's what I really, really liked about this.
Yeah, me too. And I just want to quickly shout out, because I mentioned Ben Mankiewicz, because I felt like he had cool insight in this. There's another guy named Ian Nathan who is featured throughout this. He's a writer and author and apparently director. But he's really cool. Like, his insights are articulated really well. Like, not everybody on here I think is worth noting, but those two guys, in my opinion, are worth noting. And the archival footage is great. They interview H.R. Giger's wife, and like you said, Dan O'Bannon's wife. Dan O'Bannon's wife has a really beautiful way of kind of wrapping up his passing and where she sees his energy or spirit going after he died. And some little teases are made as to what could happen. You know, you mentioned it as well, but they show some cool like boxes of Dan O'Bannon's potential works in the future. And who knows if he'll live beyond the grave with his writings and whatnot. But at the very least, this is a nice tribute to a classic film and to artists who maybe were not understood very well back then, but I think are definitely put up on pedestals today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys and gals, if you have any interest, Memory, The Origins of Alien, I think is top notch. You can watch it online, or you can order the Blu-ray. It's awesome. So I had a blast. And Zach, I love our August, our month of documentary discussions. Enter the Clones of Bruce was great, but it was so like apples and oranges, so different from this one and everything. And also that one wasn't like a technical documentary either. So both of these kind of were like a different look, a different take on the source material and everything. And I love them both. I loved both of the documentaries we covered this year.
Yeah, I think this one, Lee, shout out to our boy Lee, that Enter the Clones sparked his interest in some of the Bruce Lee movies that we talked about. I think
or
this
the
one,
Bruce Lee clone movies.
Yes, and this one I think will spark or interest people to check out, Queen of Blood or Space Vampires. And, some of the other movies that are obvious, that are obvious references to Alien or influenced Alien in some way.
Yeah, no, dude, I wrote those movies down, add them to my letterboxed watch list, so I'm very much looking forward to those, and I'm very much looking forward to next month. Obviously, we're not done with this month, but next month. We're getting close to being done with this month, but next month is going to be our crossover event. Like Zach mentioned, Wrap Up After Dark, our Patreon exclusive, series. It's at the lowest tier, $2 a month. Will get you in the door on our Patreon community, our growing Patreon community, and you will find out the movies we will be covering on the crossover next month and the director and everything like that. If you follow our Instagram page, you can probably figure out the director, but we will officially announce what movies we're going to be covering and everything. We always do that on Wrap Up After Dark. We always, at the end of the month, talk about what movies we're going to be covering the following month and everything. And then Zach mentioned the Tour de Force tier. That's the $5 tier. If you sign up now at $5, you get, oh my God, 60 episodes of Wrap Up After Dark. You also get all of our John Carpenter not breakdowns, but his the whole Tour de Force on that one. We have basically 2 years and a couple months of John Carpenter stuff. Then we have almost a full year of Don Coscarelli. And now we are working on Bill Lustig. Actually, tomorrow, Zach and I are going to be recording our review of Maniac Cop for the Tour de Force tier. So sign up now for $5. You unlock a shit ton of content. I don't care. Just sign up for 1 month and just listen to it all and then cancel it. Come back in a couple years later. But like Zach said, it does help us keep the lights on and everything at Pad Studio North and Pad Studio West. So thank you to everybody who supports us. And especially thank you to everyone who supports us at the highest tier, like Brian, who we broke down Aliens last month for. So Zach, we're almost done with August. What's the last thing coming, territory marks in August?
Well, yeah, we got actually we're going out with a bang in August because it's a 5-weeker. So I packed it full, 5 Sundays at least. So I packed it full of, 3 more episodes to go in May. 3 more episodes to go in August. One of which is an interview with Don Michael Paul. He is, of course, brought up on the TV Obscura in the Hat Squad, but he's mostly known, I think, now from Behind the Lens, writing stuff like Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. He also helped Albert Pune with the Cyborg script. You'll hear about that and a whole lot more. And we have a special guest on that episode, a surprise guest to Don. You have to find out what that's all about. Yeah, Territory Marks as well. And then JW Fails from No Retreat, No Surrender came in the studio with me and did a follow-up to his interview that I had with him earlier in the year. And I said, I'll just put it out as a bonus episode, at the end of August. So that's popping up too. And then right at the end of August, after like 2 episodes drop on a Sunday, we are dropping a pad episode. Our crossover series starts right away in the first day of September. September 1st is a Monday. We're dropping it all, baby. So that's going to be 4 or 5 weeks of content as well. Ooh, boy, you said it. Like, it's going to be, there's a lot of great stuff on our Patreon, and go into the back catalogs. Like, there's so much content there. And again, it helps support the show. We live in a world where we're trying to live as creative people. And if you're a part of that, then you're helping contribute to our creativity and bringing all that great content to you. So lots of fun stuff going on in August. Patreon.com/podcastingafterdark. Check it out. And yeah, $2 late fees and Territory Marks are stacked. Bada bing, bada boom, takating, takatum.
And as always,
this is Hans Giger from the grave saying, "We'll catch you on the dark side." Why do I sound like I'm from Romania? I have no idea, but hey, what the fuck?
Be sure to subscribe to Podcasting After Dark on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can support the show by joining our Patreon page, picking up a t-shirt from our merch store, or leaving us a 5-star review. Follow us on Instagram at Podcasting After Dark. All links can be found on our website at www.podcastingafterdark.com. And join us next time for another cult movie or TV show review with Corey Stevenson and Zach Schaefer.
Hello, my name is Anna, and if you're into scary stories and creepy real-life happenings, then I think you will love my podcast. Let me tell you a scary story. Join me every week as I read to you stories of the paranormal that actually happen to ordinary people. These are things that can't be explained and don't always make much sense, and they are sure to intrigue and to give you the shivers. So join me on your favorite podcast listening platform and let me tell you a scary story.